When I was in college and for a little stint in graduate school, I wanted to be an economist. Now, studying economics is a lot of studying theories. And one of the challenges of economics is you study a theory, but you have to assume a lot of things. You have to assume how people behave. You have to assume how people are going to interact. And one of the big challenges of studying economics is when you would take a theory and try and apply it to the real world. You know, in what they call the hard sciences, you could make an experiment, you could change it in the lab. But in economics, you really didn't have a lab for the most part. You just had to figure out what was going on. And that challenge was that economics worked okay in theory, but sometimes it didn't apply the same in the real world. That was the big challenge of that. So that shaped how I thought about things. I'm beginning to think now, in our world, we have a challenge of being stuck in what we think is the way things have to be. Rather than a challenge of thinking and applying to the real world, I think we're starting to have a challenge and a problem of trying to see beyond this world, beyond the way things are, beyond the way we've come to assume things are going to be. I'm beginning to think we're having some challenge of imagination. So let me give you a couple examples. If you would have gone to, let's say, someplace like South Africa 25 years ago and said, oh, you know, in the future, 25 years in the future, things are going to be, you're going to no longer have apartheid, you're going to have a more successful country. Most people would have said, no, can't see it happening. Can't see it happening. Can't see it happening. Because they did not have the hope that they needed to have. And it wasn't for any fault of theirs. That was the situation that they saw. Another situation. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an event, and at this event were some of the people from the state legislature. And we could ask questions. Now, it wasn't a situation where we could ask the question and have a dialogue. It was like, here's your question, there's your answer, that was it. Okay? So the question I asked is I said, hey, you know, in Texas, we have a food insecurity level of about 13%. That means about 13% of people have some challenges getting food. This is, you know, the reason we're collecting food for food pantries. And I went on to say that here in Hood County, we have a number of food pantries that do amazing work. But I asked, what could the state do to have less food pantries? Now, what I had thought is like, what could the state do to lessen the need for food pantries? But that's not what the state representatives heard. They heard, oh, should the government get involved in the food pantry business? And they told me, no, they shouldn't, and that was the end of the question. But that's not what I wanted to hear. That was not what I wanted, the question I wanted answered. And I'm not blaming our state representatives, but I'm saying that, like other people, maybe they were suffering from a crisis of imagination. That they couldn't imagine a situation where we would need less food pantries, where the world would be a little different. Now, as we read our gospel lesson today from John, we see people having another little crisis of imagination, if you would. And, you know, maybe for good reason. So, we're going to back up a little bit in John because there's a lot happening in this reading. If you just read this reading and you go, this Jesus is talking about eating flesh, this just seems not quite what we would want to hear, okay? And that's what the people at the time were saying. So let's go back a little bit in John, and we're going to have a little bit of Christmas in August, okay? Because we're going to start at the beginning of the Gospel of John for a moment. The Gospel of John, the first chapter of the Gospel of John, is usually read on either Christmas Day or the week after Christmas. It's not read on Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve is where we learn about the story of Jesus' birth. And John does not talk about Jesus' birth. Okay? Also, John, unlike the Gospel of Mark, doesn't start with Jesus' ministry. No, the Gospel of John starts with in the beginning, like the beginning. And John tells us that at the beginning, Jesus, the Word, the Logos, the very essence of God, was with God and was responsible for creation. Okay, so we've got Jesus, we've got Christ that's responsible for creation in John, and then what does John move to right away? He moves out of the past and goes right to the present and says, this Jesus is now made flesh. John likes the word flesh. He uses it a lot. This Spirit, this God that was beyond all understanding, has now become flesh, just like us. Just like us. So now Jesus is on this earth walking in flesh and blood. Okay? So very important that this is one of the emphasis that John talks about with Jesus. So now let's go where we are in the story. Jesus is talking to the crowd. So we're just going to back up a little bit to figure out how we got here. Okay? So the 6th chapter of John starts off with Jesus feeding the multitudes. So they're out on a hill. They're listening to Jesus. It's time for some food. Jesus says to Andrew, hey, we got to feed these people. Andrew's like, please. We don't have anything. Do you know how much money it would take to cover all this food? And then somebody else, one of the other disciples, comes up and says, hey, there's this kid here. He's got 5 barley loaves and a couple fish. You know, I know it's not much to share, but it's a starting point. Jesus blesses it, hands it out. At the end, they send out a group with baskets. They come back, fill up the baskets. It's all multiplied. Everybody's satisfied. Great. People love this miracle. They love the miracle maybe a little too much because they wanted to make Jesus king. So Jesus leaves. He goes to another place. The disciples go on ahead of him. Jesus is behind. They're in a boat. Jesus walks on water. You know, just another small miracle in this whole big thing. The people realize he's gone. They get in boats. They find him, and they're going, okay, we found Jesus. Now, we don't know exactly what they wanted, but maybe they wanted a couple things. Maybe they wanted like a nice bread machine miracle to keep going on. You know, maybe they wanted Jesus to create one of those ovens where you didn't need to put anything in and just bread just kept on coming out. Kind of like, you know, I Love Lucy conveyor belt of bread going on. Maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe they wanted to once again create him as king because he showed this sign, this miracle. Maybe they wanted both. But what Jesus tells them is he tells them first, that we learned about a couple weeks ago, hey, you know, don't start with the small talk. You're here about the bread. But I've got something better for you. I've got something bigger. I've got something that you can't imagine yet. And that is the bread of life. A bread that is beyond food, that is beyond understanding, that is beyond, that you're going to be working with for the rest of your lives. And 2,000 years ago, from now, people are still going to be talking about how we can participate with Jesus. Then Jesus tells them something else. He says, you know, It's my flesh that is the key here. Unless you become nourished on my flesh, nourished on my humanity, nourished on what has become real here on this world at this time, that is where the answer is. The answer is not in a never-ending bread machine. The answer is not in me taking over and covering what the Romans are doing and reversing that. No, the answer is beyond, and part of it is my flesh. Part of it is in that God has come down on earth and created in creation, just like humanity, to live and understand that creation. And there's going to come a day soon, he's telling the people, that this is going to be of the utmost importance, and that day has come today. We are going to experience that today in communion, where we accept the miracle, the mystery, the understanding that Jesus is right here in this bread and this wine, and that when we eat of it, we are participating intimately in the forgiveness and grace and love that Jesus provides for us for free, for nothing. So this idea, this hope, is something that we hold on to dearly. And it is a mystery. It is a mystery. I don't think there's going to come a day where we read this and go, oh yeah, flesh, I get it. No, I think it's meant to be a mystery that we're going to wrestle with. And we're going to continue to wrestle with this mystery and to become closer to this mystery and imbibe, walk, live in this mystery of God. And part of this mystery of God is hope. Because Jesus is telling the people there, those ideas of manna from the past, that was great, but I've got some better hope for you. I've got some better hope for you. I've got something new. I've got forgiveness that's going to never end. I've got grace that's going to never end. And the world as you see it now, you think it's just the Romans that are the problem? You think it's just hunger that's the problem? Yeah, there are problems, but I'm offering something bigger. Something bigger, and this world is going to be transformed and continue to be transformed until the end. That transformation is going to continue. So you can stay in the hope. You can stay in the hope of Christ. You can live in this God that became flesh and walked among us and now still lives in our soul and in our hearts. So, what I'd like to leave you with is some more hope and a definition of hope. So, yes, we can go to the dictionary and learn about what hope is, but there's one definition that I hold close to my heart. There's one definition that keeps getting proven over time and over time and over time. There's one definition of hope that just can't be defeated. So this definition of hope is believing in spite of the evidence and watching the evidence change. Amen.